And we're live. We're live, guys. Welcome to another episode of Good Morning Liberty. Happy Monday morning to you. It is 9:30 a.m. Pacific time here on the West Coast, October 29th, 2018. My name is Michael Bolden, broadcasting to you live as we do every single Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 9:30 a.m. Pacific time, here from my home office and studio in downtown Los Angeles. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you had a wonderful weekend. And I hope the Monday morning blues are past you. I got out and I did a little run, but I had way too much lasagna over the weekend, so that was a little slow. But I did celebrate my 15-year anniversary. If you were listening to me last week, I've been pretty excited about that with my partner, Sarah. And we had an amazing weekend for those of you who may be wondering. So before we get into the stories of the day, I do want to give a quick reminder, and I'll pull this up here for those of you who watching on YouTube. First of all, I am absolutely going to start releasing this show as a podcast audio only on, Apple will take a little time for the approval, Google, Stitcher, and elsewhere in the next couple of episodes. I'll start doing that. Probably not today's episode, but we'll back post the previous episodes in our feed over time. So you'll be able to eventually dig in and listen to all of them audio only. We've had a lot of people ask about that, and I think that's pretty cool. So I figured out how it's going to be an easy process for me to put that into my workflow. And I also want to do a quick reminder of a couple of events this week, Sunday. If you're here in Southern California or within striking distance of Los Angeles, please do come join us for a free brunch event on Sunday from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m., hosted by Liberty on the Rocks Los Angeles and Republican Liberty Caucus of LA County and the Mises Caucus, LP Mises Caucus, and probably some other people as well. It's we're doing a brunch with myself, Jason Stapleton of the Jason Stapleton program, which is awesome, and Brian McWilliams of Lions of Liberty. These are really awesome people to hang out with. We're mostly just going to hang out. We'll probably talk some liberty and some Constitution and some stuff, strategy and things like that. But come and hang out and spend some time with like-minded individuals. It's free to join us, and brunch will probably be pretty good too. And then also next week, well, not this coming week, but the following week on Saturday, I'll be in Dallas, Texas with the Abbeville Institute for an event called The Revival of Secession and State Nullification. I'm talking on the state of the nullification movement, where things are foundationally, and where things can go with some good strategy, advancing liberty without permission from Washington, D.C. So, hi to Matt Hughes, already beat me to it, smashed. For those of you who have not done so yet, if you are watching us, whether you're watching us live or in the archive, please make sure to smash the like button, whether you're watching on YouTube or on Minds.com or on Facebook or Twitter or wherever you happen to be seeing this. At most platforms, when you hit the like button, you smash the like button, it tells the platform that you want other people to see it as well. And somehow it registers in their algorithm for those that use that to show it to more people. Hi to Richard Robertson and to EHP Training and everybody else who's watching. I really appreciate you being here with me today. Thank you so much. Again, happy Monday. Now, today I want to talk about our good buddy Hillary Clinton. I know there's not too many fans of her out here. I have some family members who loved her. I have some family members who hated her, and neighbors and vice versa. A lot of the people that I have met locally here in Los Angeles tend to be progressives, and even those, the Bernie Sanders types, I had so many of them tell me, well, I'm voting for Hillary, but I'm holding my nose. She's awful. So a lot of people just don't like these mainstream establishment types on left or right, whether it's Hillary or Mitt Romney. They're all pretty bad, but for some reason, people keep going to the polls and supporting them. But Hillary came out with a tweet last week. For those of you who are really close to watching her day to day, she came out with a tweet last week that made her sound kind of like a tenther. And now to me, this is not surprising. She basically advocated a 10th Amendment strategy without using the term 10th Amendment or nullification. She advocated a 10th Amendment strategy because, like all good establishment liberals, they recognize good strategy to get their things done. And if one were to look at the state of government all around us, the people that want more government have been winning. So I think it's very important to pay attention to what they do and how they do it. Learn from it. If you want less government, learn what they've been doing and watch what they've done. Now, Hillary is now talking about 10th Amendment approach, and she put out a series of tweets which came across my desk from a number of people. Here's one from Joe Walsh, not the singer, the other Joe Walsh. He says, it's like Hillary just discovered the 10th Amendment. Here's what she tweeted. A reality of a Supreme Court with a right-wing majority, which is a falsehood, but is that the states are a new important front in protecting civil rights, especially the rights of the most vulnerable among us. Now, certainly, this is not new. States are the forefront of protecting the rights of individuals from federal overreach and have always been so. In fact, for anyone who paid attention to any of the statements of founders, whether it's the big government Alexander Hamilton or the leading Federalist lawyer Theophilus Parsons, who at one point Elbridge Gerry had said, can I get you arguing for me? Because it doesn't matter what, and I'm paraphrasing, I'm probably ramming a little bit longer, but basically he said to him, no matter what position I take, if you're on my side, I'm going to win. So Theophilus Parsons made it very clear that the people will be able to declare things void. So many founders from Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, Hamilton, Parsons, and others were very clear that the states were the line of defense against federal overreach. So the fact that Hillary is saying that it's important for people to focus on state-level activity because they recognize that right now they are losing in Washington, D.C. in some ways. I mean, I could make the case that they really aren't because government is getting bigger and bigger and bigger anyways, even though Democrats, per se, people with D's next to their name are not in power. Certainly the spending is going up. The mass surveillance under the NSA and other programs has been expanded and extended. The amount of gun control enforcement on a federal level has gone up. So in some ways, one could say having a full Republican federal government in Washington, D.C. advances many of the Democrats' liberal goals because there is no opposition. I can make that case personally because when the Democrats are in power, at least Republicans take a stand in Washington, D.C. and on the state level saying, well, we don't want this. They take a stand and oppose things. I want to also say hi over to Jeff Hafley. Thank you for stopping by and watching the show. You know, my idea with doing a side note, I'm just rambling. I know we've had a number of people come to us watching after the Ron Paul Liberty Report. Ron does his show every day, Monday through Friday, every weekday at 9 a.m. Pacific time, noon Eastern time, 11 Central, because he broadcasts from Texas. And it's usually done by like 9:20, 9:25. And my idea was, oh, I'm going to start doing this show and start doing it 9:30. So you basically get a liberty block. Ron's done. You get a little bit of break, grab something to eat, go to the bathroom, whatever you got to do. And then here you are a few minutes later, and you've got my show. And my hope is that someone, because I usually am done about 10 a.m. I do about a half-hour program. My hope is that someone else in the movement will pick up the mantle, pick up the torch, and do a program at 10 o'clock. And then we've got basically a block and build on from that. And we've got a block of live Liberty programming. So thank you, Jeff, for joining me. I'm not sure if you came from the Ron Paul show. We've had a number of people tell me that they have. So that's really cool. So, but back to this Hillary Clinton thing. Brian McClanahan, who is a really great writer, blogger, and podcaster, he did an email blast. A lot of times we take the content, we worked it out with him, where we take the content of his email blast, which is a really long blog post oftentimes, that at the end says, well, if you want to learn more about this, listen to episode blank of my podcast that talks about this in more detail. Well, we post these a lot of times over at the blog at 10thamendmentcenter.com, and he sent one out late last week talking about this Hillary Clinton situation. And he points out, and the title is The Left Goes Neo-Confederate and Discovers States' Rights. Brian starts out like this. Greetings, fellow Neo-Confederates. And for those of you who've been in this movement or who've paid attention for any amount of time, you may be aware of the Tom Woods, Bob Murphy joke video. And I don't know why I don't have this ready to show for people watching on YouTube. But basically, there was this Bob dressed up as kind of a zombie. And he, in response to everything that Tom said about decentralization, liberty, the Constitution, nullification, they cut over to Bob, who was acting as the mainstream reporter, and his response was Neo-Confederate, because that was the response that we heard year in and year out under the Obama administration when Democrats and the left were in charge in Washington, D.C. We heard this over and over and over, that if you supported decentralization, if you supported nullification, if you even mentioned secession, you were absolutely a racist, a neo-confederate. You hated minorities, you hated liberty, and you were the bad guy. So Brian basically throws it back on Hillary because she's saying now let's focus our energy on the state level. Now, she's not alone. Last year, Bernie Sanders put out a tweet that said, talking about marijuana in response to Jeff Sessions saying the federal government was going to ramp up enforcement of federal marijuana prohibition, which shouldn't exist in the first place, is unconstitutional. And now 32 states are defying Washington, D.C. Jeff Sessions doesn't have a chance, but Bernie Sanders, after all these years, puts out a tweet that says states absolutely have the right to deal with marijuana on their own level in their own state. So Bernie Sanders is talking states' rights. And again, on marijuana, Elizabeth Warren introduced a bill called the States Act in Washington, D.C., which gives states the permission to make their own choice on marijuana. Now, certainly the states have already been doing what they want to, and individuals have been doing what they want to without permission from Washington, D.C., but both Warren and Bernie Sanders are citing the 10th Amendment and this nasty thing called states' rights to advocate things that they like when the opposition is in power. Now, they didn't say anything about this when the Obama administration was ramping up enforcement of marijuana prohibition. A lot of people want to believe that Obama was soft on weed and good on the 10th Amendment because he was a pot smoker. That's the message that we hear. But this is total bullcrap. We know from the numbers that Barack Obama, in his first term alone, he spent more money on enforcement and conducted more federal enforcement actions than George W. Bush and Bill Clinton combined in 3 terms. So Obama was the worst in history. We're doing some research to see how things are playing out with Jeff Sessions. I'm assuming it's not even close to as bad as Obama. That's just my gut instinct, because we are not seeing the daily reports of raids and shutdowns and things like that. There's a lot of aggressive rhetoric coming from Jeff Sessions, but we're not seeing it play out like that. So I'm assuming that the feds have basically lost at this point. It will be nice to see it actually end. But Warren and Sanders, they never talked about this when Obama was in office. They didn't talk about the states being able to make their choices, giving permission, or the states having the right to do things. Hillary never talked about the states being a place to protect the rights of minorities. Or however, what did she say? She says, the states are a new important front in protecting civil rights. Even though in recent years, if you want to talk, I don't like the term civil rights, I don't like the term constitutional rights, we can simply just talk about marijuana or asset forfeiture. The states have been taking action ahead of Washington, D.C. to restrict or end the process of asset forfeiture. They've been at the forefront of advancing the Right to Try Act, which allows people who are on their deathbed the right, which they already had, but they've been blocked by government. They basically allow people who are dying to try a medicine that hasn't completed all the centralized FDA approval process. Hey, if you're dying, why would you want to wait until you're 10 years past dead to try something that might or might not work? If I'm about to die, if I got 6 months to live, and someone says, well, there's promise in this treatment. It may kill you, but you may live. It may cure you. Why not take the chance? And the federal government for decades has blocked people from actually making this choice, and 30-plus states allowed people to do it. And then eventually the federal government followed. So states have been at the forefront of this for a long time. And I'm only talking about modern instances where this happened. We could also go back to the federal slavery days when the Federal Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 was attempting to require everyone in northern states to help slave catchers return human beings to bondage in the South. Well, what did states do? They were at the forefront. They were the new important front, and they weren't even new as a front at that point. But in the 1840s and 50s, they were aggressively blocking federal enforcement of the Federal Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. And I'm going to do a full show on that whole scenario in the future. But this has been happening for a long, long time. And Hillary, like many politicians, is an opportunist. I think she's absolutely she's not absolutely correct in her statement. Her statement is filled with a bunch of garbage. First of all, she calls the Supreme Court a right-wing majority. I disagree. I think it has a conservative majority in some modern conservative, kind of establishment conservative majority in some ways, but they're not tenthers. She calls the states a new important front. That's also incorrect. She refers to protecting civil rights. Rights are natural rights, or they're not rights. So yes, protecting the rights of the most vulnerable, they certainly have done that for a long time. So she's got the general concept. That is, go to the states if you want to protect people's rights, because you can't rely on Washington, D.C. to get the job done. She is correct in that. Matt Hughes says in the chat, Neo-confederate. You guys have to see this video. I will put it in the show links, even though I don't have it available here for you, those of you watching right now. It is awesome. For anybody who knows Tom and Bob, and they just finished up the Contra Cruise episode 3, year 3, and I got to go see them briefly last week. Just amazing stuff. Jeff, very kind of you, says, been a fan for years. You're an inspiration. Also says, perhaps Hillary would be willing to join us in the new federalism movement and lobby Democratic states to pass new amendments. She's actually saying do this. Now, what she's advocating is going to be more progressivism, more socialism, more things for the hard left. But I would make the case that there are 2 good reasons to say, yes, we want them to do this. Absolutely. If you're going... We can't pretend that people who hate liberty don't exist. They outnumber those of us who believe in liberty by a huge margin. So what's the best scenario? What's the best situation in a horrible scenario where our current culture, our current society is filled with anti-constitutional, anti-liberty people? Well, we want them to restrict the geographic area of their horrible choices. So if people here in California decide to pass, and I'm not an advocate of single-payer health care, but in a strategic step, rather than people pushing forward in Washington, D.C., I would love to see California give in and just put it into practice. There was a bill last year that the session's over, but they'll probably try to go for it again. SB 562. It was a universal health care plan. Well, how else is the rest of the country going to learn the negative effects of this type of program until someone implements it? Well, either they're going to implement it on a federal level or on a local or a state level. So we've got to get them to work on a state or a local level so people can watch how it plays out. And I think this is how the system was set up. That's how things are supposed to work. And if they happen to be stronger on a state level than people who believe in liberty, and it's very possible if they start reallocating resources to that instead of their the whole Supreme Court thing was really just crazy strategy. But if they start putting their effort into state and local races, like many of establishment Republicans have done in recent years, then we'll see things play out the way they're supposed to. They may not have positive results for liberty in the short term, but the fact that things are decentralized in the long run is how things are supposed to work, because then you still have a chance. Because if they have a single-payer health system for everybody, then everybody is screwed. And if they have it for most states, then most states are screwed. But then the positive, you're looking for the shining light, then maybe Rhode Island. Well, not Rhode Island, but maybe New Hampshire or maybe Montana. Then they have an opportunity to show things differently. And those states that aren't rich, that can really rip people off and continue propping up these programs, like California, I think, will continue to be able to prop up this type of program for a long, long time. They'll just keep raising different types of taxes that don't really affect people a huge amount over a period of time. They prop up all kinds of garbage. Let's say state of California continues propping it up. Well, maybe another state like North Dakota or something, and I'm not sure if or Minnesota, maybe they don't have the financial resources to keep things going. And over time, people will say, well, Montana isn't running into a financial crisis over healthcare, and they have a free market system. I mean, they don't right now. But if things were to play out like this, then basically a nationwide one-size-fits-all solution on everything blocks people from learning quicker. It slows down the learning process because we only see this kind of quasi half-assed type of program on one side or the other of Democrat or Republican. Everybody has they kind of succumb to some of the needs of the other side, and you really can't tell what's what, ever. I mean, for those of us who understand that the problem is government, we recognize that all along, but the general public really ends up blaming one political party or the other, and it's just back and forth and back and forth. So if Hillary is driving people to look to the states instead, and then they put their programs in on a state level, this in the long run, I think, can be positive. But we have to keep in mind that when we hear 10th Amendment talk from people like Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton and Elizabeth Warren, and I would make the case from most people on the right as well, most Republicans in Washington, when they talk 10th Amendment, they are just being opportunists. They don't really believe it. We actually have a report that covered, and I'll cover this more later, but we did a report covering the amount of bills filed to block and nullify federal gun control laws. It cut in almost half as soon as Trump got in office. That shows you that even on the state level, the Republicans are fakes too, because there has been no repeal of any federal gun laws. It's just that, well, now we don't need to do it. I think a lot of politicians are really happy just grandstanding. They'll file a really positive bill to look good when the opposition is in power. So Jeff is talking about a lot of amendments. I don't really know much about that. Matt says, because they, the anti-liberty crowd, outnumber us so drastically is why I'm scared of a constitutional convention. I think that's an interesting argument as well. So I did an article basically covering this. Well, let's look a little bit more at what Brian McClanahan had to say here. And he says, with everyone jawing about a return to civility in American politics, we all should be reminded that American politics have never been civil. If you look at the discussions in the newspapers in the early days of the American Republic, after the Constitution was ratified, during it, I mean, people were nasty. And it's important to not always be civil. I mean, why do we have to act all friendly and talk kindly of people who are trying to attack our rights? I'm not into that personally. And Brian says the solution was always federalism. Always has been federalism, the ability of states to control their own internal police. That was the quote, is an internal police. The Constitution would not have been ratified had any friend of the document promised otherwise. The real threat to civility in America has always been nationalism. Centralized power is the problem, because when you have the one-size-fits-all solution, then that destroys any chance of civility, because you have to make everybody who opposes your views your enemy. I mean, somebody in Providence, Rhode Island, I keep going back to Rhode Island because it's so far away and so opposite in size and distance to here in California. Let's say, and Rhode Island's a really progressive state too, but let's say somebody in Providence, Rhode Island wants to do something locally on the size of their toilet that's different than how we do that here. Well, if I'm really into environmental controls, I recognize that the federal government has a requirement for the size of your toilet. It can't be too big, for example. And so then I have to attack them as an enemy in order to keep this, instead of just recognizing that a federalist solution will allow people to try things out differently and learn what's good and bad in other areas. Brian goes on and he says, Hillary Clinton and the progressives are at least rhetorically figuring things out, that every issue should not be a national crisis. Their commitment may only be as lasting as their time out of power, and I expect that from most of them. But maybe the few clear-headed sycophants among them might listen. One can hope. I personally recognize, at least in my work, that when power shifts, we started when the Bush administration was in power back in 2006, I recognize that when power shifts, a lot of people just shift their viewpoints to, well, I don't really have any principles, and I'm just going to stay with my team. But a few of them trickle down towards our level, which is, oh man, I like this principle, and now they're changing because they're in charge, so I think it should be decentralization. We continue to grow. It goes back and forth and back and forth. So we get a little bit of a trickle down, not Reaganomics style, but a little bit of a trickle down in people who recognize that decentralization is the cure to our problems. Localism is the cure because you don't have to count on somebody in a wholly different area with a different economic, political, or religious viewpoint to agree with you. You can just live your life in your own way in your own community, as long as you can convince people in your community to go along with it. But you have a much better chance of doing that. And more people recognize that in the grassroots. It's a very slow process, and I think over time we will win in regards to that. Maybe not in my lifetime or yours, but over time I think that message is going to win out. The Hillary Clintons and Rick Santorums of the world and Jeff Sessions and Elizabeth Warrens, these people are not going to switch teams. They are dedicated to team. They are dedicated to political party. They don't have principles. And in some ways, I like politicians who have no principles over the ones who have some that are bad, the ones that have bad principles, because the ones with no principles are happy to swish back and forth. And if there is enough public pressure to say, well, now start being a tenther, support localism and decentralization, well, then you're going to start doing it, even though just a few years ago you would have attacked it as evil. And I just want to, before we head out today, I want to point out this article that I wrote in January of 2017. And it was basically covering this message. Now that Republicans have control in Washington, D.C., Democrats have moved to an opposition strategy, and some prominent members of the left have even started citing the Constitution and the 10th Amendment. So it's not just Hillary. There's a guy named Erwin Chemerinsky. He's basically the guy that anytime there's a mainstream media report on work that we do, U.S. News, AP, New York Times, whatever, and they talk about our work to nullify something, they call in an expert to point out how wrong we are. And Erwin Chemerinsky, he's called the dean from University of California, Irvine. He's the dean of UCI School of Law, maybe constitutional law, something like that. He's one of the leading constitutional scholars. He's known as that. He's awful, though, and he's a flip-flopper. But he's the guy that they call in, and he gives them a quote, and they tell him how bad and how wrong and how dumb we are and how we don't know anything, basically. But just last year, he and some co-authors put an article out in the Washington Post citing the anti-commandeering doctrine. This is the legal doctrine that states and local communities do not have to provide manpower or resources to help enforce federal laws or regulations or programs. He said, well, of course, this is a totally constitutional legal thing, and it should be used to support immigration sanctuary cities. He's all on board for that now that the Trump administration was in office. He wasn't even talking about it, even though these communities were doing it when Obama was in office. But he's using this 10th Amendment tool to bludgeon the opposition in Washington, D.C. But just a few years earlier, when we got a lot of prominence for using the same anti-commandeering doctrine to say we shouldn't provide resources to NSA spying when Barack Obama was in office, and we're still doing that today. We just had a bill like that passed into law in Michigan over the summer. He actually said that doing this was regulating the federal government and illegal. He says the question here is, what is the extent that the state is interfering with the achievement of the federal objective? So using anti-commandeering when Barack Obama was in office was considered interfering with a federal objective. Using the exact same thing when Donald Trump is in office is a total legal and constitutional approach. So whether it's Hillary or Chemerinsky, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and I've got to include the Jeff Sessions, Rick Santorum, the Newt Gingriches of the world. These people cite the 10th Amendment when it's to their political advantage, and they do it all the time. I think in a way it's positive, because the more that they say that, the more that some people on the fence that aren't just marching in lockstep with their political leaders will come over to our side. Or I have also seen people say to me things like, well, I don't agree with what you're trying to accomplish with nullifying gun control, but I recognize that states don't have to do help the feds and blah, blah, blah. This happens more and more often as the years go by. So I think overall it can be a positive thing. So before we head out today, here's a quick quote of the day, and I think this sums it up, from Thomas Paine in 1795. He says, "He that would make his own liberty secure must guard even his enemy from oppression." So I hope you learned something today. I hope you found something interesting. I hope you found it a little fun poking at Hillary Clinton and her buddies, calling the way Brian McClanahan called them Neo-confederates. I think he's awesome. I'll post a link to all these articles, the tweet from Joe Walsh to Brian McClanahan's podcast, which is really good, in the show notes on YouTube and on our website. We also will post these to BitChute and Real.video, which is now Brighteon.com, plus social media channels, Minds, Twitter, Facebook, elsewhere. Make sure, if you like the show, wherever you're watching it, smash the like button, share the link, leave some comments of your thoughts, and also feel free to email us, team@10thamendmentcenter.com, of ideas of things that you'd like us to cover in the future. I hope you found this really interesting and educational, and I will see you, as we do every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I'll see you on Wednesday, 9:30 a.m. Pacific time. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great Monday.